By the mid-3rd century BCE, the conflict between Rome and Carthage had shifted decisively from reaction to initiative. Following their successful establishment in northeastern Sicily, Roman commanders recognized that a prolonged war of sieges and attrition would ultimately favor the maritime and economic strengths of Carthage. To counterbalance this, the Roman Republic undertook a radical transformation, the construction of a fleet capable of rivaling Carthage at sea. This strategic pivot marked a significant departure from Rome's traditional military model. A state whose strength had rested almost entirely on its legions now committed to naval warfare on a scale it had never previously attempted. With remarkable speed and determination, the Senate authorized the building of hundreds of quinquiremes, heavy warships modeled, notably, on a captured Carthaginian vessel. The introduction of the corvus, a boarding device, reflected a deliberate Roman attempt to adapt naval warfare to its infantry-based strength. Instead of mastering maneuver, they would bring the enemy into hand-to-hand combat on deck. What followed was a staggering display of state mobilization. Shipyards across the Italian coast were expanded or newly constructed. Rowers, mostly drawn from the lower classes, were trained en masse. The political elite, inexperienced but resolute, assumed command of these new fleets with the same patrician confidence that had once conquered central Italy. This transformation was more than tactical, it was ideological. It signaled Rome's refusal to accept strategic inferiority and its capacity to reshape its institutions in pursuit of supremacy. The Republic was no longer a continental force with regional ambitions, it had become a player in the wider Mediterranean theater. And from this point forward, the question was no longer whether Rome could fight at sea, but how far it was prepared to go to dominate it. In 256 BCE, Rome executed one of the most audacious maneuvers in its early history, a full-scale invasion of North Africa. The Senate, emboldened by recent naval victories and eager to force a decisive end to the war, dispatched a massive expeditionary force under the joint command of consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso. With a fleet of more than 300 quinquiremes, escorted by troop transports and supply ships, the Romans crossed the open sea, an operation unparalleled in scale for the Republic at the time. The voyage culminated in the naval battle off Cape Ecnomus, where the Roman fleet confronted and defeated the Carthaginian navy in one of the largest naval engagements of antiquity. This victory cleared the passage to Africa and allowed the Roman legions to land near modern-day Tunisia. Initial operations were swift and effective. Regulus advanced into the Carthaginian hinterland, capturing towns, defeating local forces, and spreading alarm throughout the Punic heartland. The campaign was not merely punitive, it was designed to strike at the root of Carthaginian power. Carthage, facing internal panic and military collapse, sought peace. But Regulus, emboldened by his successes and perhaps overreaching in his estimation of Roman leverage, offered terms so severe that they were tantamount to unconditional submission. Carthage rejected them and regrouped, turning to foreign aid to salvage its position. They employed the Spartan mercenary Xanthippus, a tactician of considerable experience, who quickly reformed the Punic army. Under his command, the Carthaginians met the Romans in battle and decisively routed them. Regulus himself was captured, and the Roman expeditionary force was annihilated. The bold gamble had turned into catastrophe. The African campaign, initially conceived as a final blow, instead extended the war and exposed the limits of Roman overconfidence. But it also demonstrated the shifting scope of the conflict, from the island theaters of Sicily to the very soil of North Africa. For the first time, Rome had projected its military power beyond the Italic world, and though humbled in defeat, it had irreversibly altered the geographic and strategic dimensions of the war. The Roman defeat in Africa did not bring about a collapse in momentum, rather, it hardened Roman resolve. What followed was a series of naval catastrophes that, under any other polity, might have concluded the war in Carthage's favor. In 255 BCE, as the remnants of Regulus' army awaited evacuation, a Roman fleet arrived to retrieve the survivors. Though the mission was tactically successful, it was followed by disaster. A violent storm off the coast of Camarina wrecked over 270 ships and claimed tens of thousands of lives. The Roman fleet had proven its courage in war, now it was at the mercy of the sea. Still, the Senate did not falter. By 253 BCE, Rome had constructed another fleet, undeterred by cost or loss. That fleet too met disaster, again to nature rather than Punic arms. Yet even after these twin calamities, the Republic continued to rebuild. What emerges from Mommsen's account is not merely the scale of destruction, but the depth of institutional resilience. No Mediterranean power, least of all Carthage, had demonstrated the logistical and financial capacity to absorb such losses, let alone respond with immediate reconstruction. This was not only a feat of engineering or treasury. It reflected the Roman political system's ability to mobilize public and private resources on a national scale. The costs were borne not by the state alone, but by the Roman aristocracy and its clients, individuals and families who saw naval reconstruction not simply as a patriotic duty but as a matter of honor and survival. Shipbuilding was distributed across the Italian coast, and naval training continued even in the face of repeated attrition. What began as a defensive adaptation to Carthaginian naval power had evolved into a structural component of Roman warfare. Though Rome suffered devastating setbacks at sea, its determination to contest Carthage's maritime dominance never wavered. The disasters at Camarina and beyond exposed weaknesses in Roman seamanship and meteorological ignorance, but they also revealed a republic that would pay any price, rebuild any loss, and endure any storm, so long as the war remained unfinished. As the war dragged into its second decade, the focus of conflict returned to Sicily, where the land campaign became increasingly characterized by attritional siege warfare and positional deadlock. The island's rugged terrain, combined with the formidable fortifications of Carthaginian strongholds, rendered rapid advances impossible. Roman operations centered on the western coast, particularly around the cities of Lilybaeum and Drepana, Carthage's key logistical bases. Lilybaeum was besieged repeatedly but never fully taken. Roman forces invested the city with elaborate siege works, blockaded its harbor, and attempted assaults by land and sea. Yet Carthaginian blockade runners, skillfully navigating through adverse conditions and under cover of darkness, kept the city provisioned. The Roman inability to fully sever these maritime lines of communication prolonged the conflict and demoralized commanders who had hoped for swift results. Drepana, situated just north of Lilybaeum, became the focus of successive Roman naval operations. Its deep harbor and direct sea access allowed Carthaginian fleets to operate with a flexibility that the Romans struggled to match. Though Roman troops held the countryside and restricted Punic mobility inland, they could not dislodge Carthage from its fortified positions. Siege warfare, while effective in neutralizing open Carthaginian field movements, proved inadequate to force a conclusion. Compounding the stalemate was the nature of the Carthaginian defense itself. Unlike Roman legions, Carthage relied heavily on foreign mercenaries, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, who, though irregular in discipline, were fierce fighters and often familiar with guerrilla tactics. Roman attempts to break through often met with sudden counterattacks, ambushes, and sorties launched from the fortified cities. Mommsen underscores that this phase of the war drained both states without producing decisive results. For Rome, each campaign season meant renewed conscription, greater financial expenditure, and mounting frustration. For Carthage, retaining its Sicilian holdings required a constant influx of money, mercenaries, and logistical coordination from across the sea. The strategic balance held, but it held in paralysis, a grinding confrontation over stone walls, narrow passes, and stubborn defenders, with no clear victor in sight. In 249 BCE, the Roman Republic suffered one of its most humiliating defeats at sea, an event that exposed the limits of overconfidence and the consequences of strategic miscalculation. The consul Publius Claudius Pulcher, newly appointed and eager to deliver a decisive blow, launched an assault on the Carthaginian fleet anchored at Drepana. Rejecting the cautious advice of his naval officers and disregarding unfavorable omens, most notoriously the sacred chicken's refusal to eat, which he dismissed by throwing them overboard, Pulcher sailed into disaster. The Carthaginian commander, Adherbal, responded with skill and speed. He avoided entrapment within the harbor and instead drew his ships into the open sea, where Carthage's superior naval maneuverability proved decisive. The Roman fleet, hampered by its uncoordinated deployment and poorly aligned squadrons, was caught in confusion. Over 90 Roman ships were sunk or captured, and thousands of sailors were lost. The remainder fled back to base, leaving Drepana in Carthaginian control. Pulcher was recalled to Rome in disgrace. Stripped of command and fined, he became a cautionary figure, a symbol of impiety, arrogance, and failure in military leadership. Yet the catastrophe did not end there. His successor, Lucius Junius Pullus, attempted to deliver a much-needed supply fleet to the blockading forces but met with equally grim results. A combination of enemy action and a violent storm destroyed the transports, and Pullus, facing political ruin, took his own life. These twin naval defeats marked the lowest point in Roman operations during the First Punic War. They revealed both the fragility of Roman naval logistics and the dangers of hasty aggression without adequate intelligence or preparation. More importantly, they gave Carthage a reprieve, an opportunity to consolidate its holdings in western Sicily, restore confidence, and maintain its control over the sea. The Drepana debacle underscored a critical lesson in Roman warfare: tactical daring could not substitute for strategic discipline. The Roman Senate, although shaken, responded not with retreat but with recalibration. Even in defeat, the Republic began to reconfigure its naval command structure, reassert control over maritime routes, and prepare for the next confrontation. But for the moment, Carthage held the advantage, earned not through overwhelming force, but through composure, competence, and the failures of its adversaries. In the later stages of the war, Carthage increasingly relied on a commander whose skill, resilience, and strategic imagination would leave a lasting imprint on Punic military history: Hamilcar Barca. Operating initially from Mount Hurt and later from Eryx, Hamilcar transformed the stagnant front into a dynamic theater of irregular warfare. With limited resources and no decisive naval superiority, he abandoned conventional engagements in favor of mobile operations, exploiting the difficult terrain and employing guerrilla tactics against Roman forces. His command coincided with a shift in Carthaginian strategy, from attempting to hold all positions, to focusing on exhausting Rome through attrition and mobility. Hamilcar's forces, a composite of African, Iberian, and Ligurian mercenaries, proved adept at sudden raids, supply interdictions, and ambushes. The mountainous strongholds he occupied allowed him to strike unpredictably, forcing the Romans to stretch their lines and defend multiple fronts simultaneously. This method of war, though it yielded no spectacular victories, disrupted Roman plans and kept key Sicilian regions under threat. The Roman forces, superior in numbers and discipline, were nevertheless unable to bring Hamilcar to open battle under favorable terms. His capacity to sustain operations for years without direct access to the sea, while maintaining troop cohesion and morale, attested to his organizational and tactical abilities. Moreover, Hamilcar's campaigns served a dual function. Militarily, they prolonged the war and forced Rome into further expenditure and recruitment. Politically, they restored some measure of Carthaginian pride and initiative, particularly after earlier losses in Africa and the sea. From his Sicilian command posts, Hamilcar cultivated a cadre of loyal officers and soldiers, many of whom would later follow his son, Hannibal, in the campaigns against Rome. Mommsen treats Hamilcar with a level of respect rarely granted to Carthaginian figures in Roman historiography. He emerges as a commander who, despite operating under constrained conditions, redefined the conduct of war in Sicily. His actions did not reverse Carthage's strategic disadvantage, but they forestalled Roman victory, and they revealed the enduring capacity of Carthage to resist, provided it had the right leadership in the field. By 242 BCE, after over 2 decades of attritional warfare, Roman patience with indecisive campaigns in Sicily had reached its limit. Carthage remained entrenched, and Hamilcar Barca continued to harass Roman positions from the mountainous strongholds of Eryx. The Roman Senate, pressed by war exhaustion and financial strain, made a final strategic decision: construct a new fleet, not funded by the treasury, but through private capital contributed by Rome's wealthiest citizens. This measure, exceptional in both scope and symbolism, placed the outcome of the war in the hands of collective civic sacrifice. The command of the new fleet was given to Gaius Lutatius Catullus. With methodical precision, he implemented a naval blockade around Drepana and Lilybaeum, cutting off Carthage's remaining strongholds from reinforcements and supply. The Carthaginian government, unable to raise a comparable fleet in time, hastily assembled a relief force and dispatched it across the sea in the spring of 241 BCE. Their aim was to break the blockade and restore access to Sicily, but their effort came too late, and the Punic crews were largely untrained. On March 10, 241 BCE, the Roman fleet intercepted the Carthaginian convoy near the Aegates Islands. The ensuing naval battle was decisive. Unlike earlier Roman naval disasters, this operation had been carefully prepared, ships were stripped down for speed, crews had been drilled, and the tactical approach emphasized maneuver and cohesion rather than aggressive boarding. The Carthaginian fleet, burdened with supplies and poorly manned, was outmatched. Dozens of Punic ships were sunk or captured, the rest scattered. The destruction of the fleet shattered Carthage's capacity to continue the war. With its Sicilian garrisons isolated and no means to recover naval superiority, the Carthaginian leadership sued for peace. Rome, sensing the opportunity to impose terms without further campaigning, accepted. The Treaty of 241 BCE required Carthage to evacuate Sicily entirely, renounce all claims to the island, and pay an indemnity of 3,200 talents over 10 years. The Punic presence in the western Mediterranean was broken. Mommsen presents this final phase not as an inevitable Roman triumph, but as a culmination of accumulated endurance, political will, and logistical innovation. The Roman Republic had suffered devastating losses, both human and material, but had never abandoned its strategic objective. In the end, it was not a single general or battle that defined Rome's success, but the capacity to rebuild, adapt, and outlast its rival. The war concluded not in spectacle, but in exhaustion and calculated victory.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.